on Ukraine, Russia, the Odessa massacre, and many other aspects of what is happening in the world today. We are here today at a webinar, and I welcome you all, that has been organized by the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. And it is my honor to host a great panel of speakers to bring us some important perspectives marking this 10th anniversary. My name is Alison Bodine. I am with Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice here in Vancouver, Canada. And I'm joining the webinar today from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. I encourage folks to write in the chat if they'd like where they are joining today from. And it's really great to see you all here from whatever continent you're joining. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, was convened by the Odessa Solidarity Campaign and has been endorsed by Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, Harriet Tubman Center for Social Justice, Mobilization Against War and Occupation, MAWO, Socialist Unity Party, the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and Virginia Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. May 2nd, today, has been 10 years since a fascist-led mob murdered at least 42 people when it set fire to the House of Trade Unions in Odessa, Ukraine. This is the Odessa massacre, and it took place shortly after the US-backed coup that overthrew the elected president of Ukraine and replaced him with a regime anxious to ally with the US and its growing global military, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. So today we mark this with 4 presenters, all of whom have visited Ukraine since the Odessa massacre. We will have with us today Phil Wilayto, the coordinator of the Odessa Solidarity Campaign and editor of the Virginia Defender, Joe Lombardo, the coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, John Parker, a leading member of the Socialist Unity Party and coordinator of the Harriet Tubman Center for Social Justice in California, Bruce Gagnon, who is joining from the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. We will also have special remarks from Penny Hess, who is here to join us as one of the Uhuru 3. So thank you all for making the time to join this important discussion, to hear the perspectives of all of our presenters. I look forward to what is going to be some engaging presentations. I encourage folks to follow the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. I'll go ahead and put in the chat the website, and we'll share it a few times throughout the webinar. But thank you all, and I say without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. I first want to welcome Phil Wilayto, who I mentioned is the coordinator of the Odessa Solidarity Campaign and editor of the Virginia Defender. Phil is based in Richmond, Virginia. Welcome, Phil. You're on mute. First one of the day.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Thanks for moderating today's discussion, and it's a pleasure to be here. As Alison explained, the Odessa massacre happened on May 2, 2014, 10 years ago today, a few months after the violent coup that overthrew the democratically elected president of Ukraine and replaced him with a right-wing regime that was pro-US, pro-NATO, pro-European Union, and anti-Russian. Ukraine and Russia had been at peace for a very long time, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and after Ukraine and the Russian Federation both declared themselves to be independent states, there was no conflict between them. It was only after the coup, in which the US was involved up to its eyeballs, that fighting broke out in Donbass, the eastern part of Ukraine, with Ukraine military using neo-Nazi paramilitary outfits as stormtroopers. The following year, 2015, supporters of those who were killed at the House of Trade Unions came to that year's UNAC conference and explained what had happened at the House of Trade Unions. The following year, at the Social Forum in Wrocław, representatives of UNAC met with the president of the Council of Mothers of May 2 that represents survivors and those killed in the massacre. And we were asked to come to Odessa for the second anniversary memorial, which was to be held at the House of Trade Unions, and which was being threatened by the same paramilitary neo-Nazi organizations that had led the massacre 2 years before. So we put together a delegation that included Bruce, as well as Regis Tremblay, an independent videographer, and myself. And we did a campaign to try to put pressure on the Ukrainian government and the US government to ensure that the fascists would not attack the memorial. And that campaign did succeed in getting the attention of the US State Department, which probably did not want another incident, especially one at which US citizens were present, because it would draw attention to the reactionary character of the Ukrainian state. The day passed without incident because some 4,000 people turned out for that memorial. And although there was a fascist present, it was far smaller, and the day came off well. After we came back from Odessa, we founded the Odessa Solidarity Campaign, which each year has encouraged local actions and protests and forums and meetings to remember the Odessa massacre and to try to break through the US and allied media, which attempts to portray Ukraine as a simple, freedom-loving democracy threatened by a larger neighbor, and completely ignoring the fact that it is an extreme right-wing authoritarian government that relies on paramilitary organizations to keep the streets and the airways and the social media free of any type of progressive dissent. We received a letter today, the defenders received a letter today from a young Palestinian woman who lives in, I'm trying to time myself so I don't go over. Alison, maybe you could give me a heads up when I hit 8 minutes. Hope somebody's watching us that we don't go over. But we received a letter today from a young Palestinian woman living in the West Bank, talking about how much the student protests here in the US and other countries meant to Palestinians. That young people, most of them who are not Palestinian, risking their academic careers, their freedom, and possibly their own lives to demand justice for Palestine. A whole new generation is getting its eyes opened about the role that the US plays in the genocide being carried out in Gaza. But despite these protests and populist sentiments against sending more money and arms to Israel, the Biden administration, with Republican support, has just signed a bill that authorizes sending $26 billion in Israel on top of the $3.8 billion it already sends to Israel every year. But at the same time, it's sending more than twice that amount, $61 billion, to Ukraine to conduct its war against Russia. The US ruling class is not schizophrenic. It doesn't do something horrible in one country and something wonderful in another. We're hoping that today's webinar will help shine some light on the true nature of Ukraine today and the role that the US is playing in it. It's obvious that Ukraine is important to the US ruling class, but why? And why should it matter to the anti-war movement? The US seeks hegemony, world dominance, Pax Americana, the peace of the plantation, the peace of the supermax prison, if necessary, the peace of the graveyard. Russia is seen as a threat because it's not in the US orbit. It's not controlled by the World Bank, the IMF, and it doesn't take orders from Washington. So it must be brought to heel, and it especially must be prevented from drawing closer to the People's Republic of China, the biggest economic challenge to world domination by the US. Joe is going to go into some of the background to the present war, which dates back to after the 2014 coup, and the experiences that all the presenters have had in visiting Ukraine will shed light on the reality of Ukraine today. We don't have to endorse the leadership or social system of any other country to know that as anti-war activists, as anti-imperialist fighters here in the US, We have an obligation to defend any country under attack by U.S. aggression. In the case of the Palestinians, we defend them because their cause is just, and because we understand that Israel is a colonial settler project that the U.S. uses as a forward military base in the Middle East. And it's not out of any love for Jewish people. After all, this is the country that sent boatloads of Jewish refugees back to Nazi Germany to die in the Holocaust, but because it needs a reliable, subservient military ally in the part of the world that holds the largest oil reserves. So we oppose U.S. support for Ukraine because that's the right thing to do, and we oppose it because we do not want to see the U.S. achieve absolute hegemony in the world. What we need is a much stronger, much broader anti-war movement that can educate more and more people as to the real nature of U.S. foreign policy that flows from the imperialist nature of this capitalist state. We hope today's webinar will make a contribution to that effort. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Phil. That was much under your time limit for the introduction, so excellent. We have next Joe Lombardo, who is the coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and is based in New York.
Hello, everybody. I avoided talking while the mute was on, and I claim the rest of Phil's time. So thank you very much, Phil. As Alison said, I'm the coordinator of UNAC. It was interesting. I was noticing that we just held a conference.
Hold up, Joe, 1 second. Okay. Sorry, there was just. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. UNAC just held a conference, and I was noticing that this panel was very similar to one we did on Ukraine at the conference that took place in Minneapolis. I've been to Ukraine twice. The first time was a long time ago, in 2006. It was about a year after what was called the Orange Revolution. And the main purpose of going at the time was not political. I went with my partner at the time, who was a professor at a university here in the United States. And she was a psychology professor and taught a course on emotional quotient, it was called. It's, I don't know, I'm not going to explain the whole thing, but she was asked to go over there and they offered to pay our way. And so I went with her, and we were there for 2 weeks, and she taught a course to teachers. We were mostly in the western part of Ukraine. We landed in Lvov and spent some time there and drove to another area somewhere midway between Lvov, which is in the extreme west of Ukraine, and Kiev, and held this seminar for teachers in Ukraine. And there were teachers from the eastern part of Ukraine who were mainly Russian speaking, and teachers from the western part of the Ukraine. Everybody at that webinar spoke Russian, but there was conflict between the two groups of teachers, and they demanded that the webinar be taught in Ukrainian, which not everybody understood. Everybody understood Russian, but not everybody understood Ukraine. And one of the interesting things about the period is was during the height of the war on Iraq, and it was interesting to see the differences between the people on the two sides of Ukraine and how they're related. From the Russian-speaking side, they were very strong against the U.S. role in Iraq. But we spoke to people from both sides, and from the western side of Ukraine, the teachers who demanded that the language that was used was Ukrainian, not Russian, told us how much they really liked the United States because what we did for them during the Orange Revolution. And this one woman was explaining to us how the U.S. paid for buses to get people to go to Kiev to join in the protests that were going on there. And she said that her workplace was reluctant to let her go, but the U.S. paid the workplace for them to go. So when the United States talks about Russian intervention in the elections and in other countries, just think of how the U.S. does intervene in Ukraine and countries all over the world. The second time I was there was in 2019 for the same reason that Phil explained. We were there because it was after the 2014 massacre that took place in Odessa. A group of people from UNAC, including me and my wife, Pippa, who I see is also on the webinar with us, and a couple of others, went to Odessa to so there would be international witnesses in case the memorial for those massacred in Odessa was attacked. And indeed, the Nazis came from all over the country and tried to intimidate those that were out at the House of Trade Unions all day long, marching all day long to leave flowers at the House of Trade Unions. And Alison, please let me know when I'm getting close also. But some of the Nazis came there to try to intimidate them. And these are real Nazis. You know, it reminds me a lot right now when we're seeing these Palestinian struggles, how they're saying they're all anti-Semitic, and they are the furthest thing from anti-Semitic. They are anti-Zionist, against the right-wing nationalist ideology. But it's the kind of lie that's put forward. Another lie is that there's no Nazis in Ukraine. But these were people who were real Nazis. They had swastikas on their clothes. There were swastikas scrawled all over the buildings and in chalk. They were very clearly Nazi organizations that were there, the Right Sector and others. And at about 3 o'clock, the families of those that were killed, about 50 people were killed in that massacre, about 100 were wounded. About the parents and families of those that were killed came, and they had a speaker system. They were going to set it up. The police did not stop the Nazis from trying to intimidate them, but the Nazis couldn't do very much. There were thousands of people that were there to memorialize them. But the police stopped the people from using the sound system, so they couldn't speak to the crowd. Later on that night, the Nazis marched in the central part of Odessa, a torchlight march. We were right in the middle of it. It was a little scary, chanting "Hang the Russians from the trees" and things like this. But they were not stopped from their using their sound system in the center of Odessa. So we were there. There was no attacks that took place, but the real reason was not because we were there, but because the numbers were such. The people of Odessa were the people that were against the coup that took place in 2014, and they were showing that on that day in their thousands, and the Nazis could not match their numbers. So in 2014, there was a coup. It was orchestrated by the United States. The United States helped bring people in from all over the country, especially the strong right-wingers from the Right Sector, from the Sloboda Party. And we all know about Victoria Nuland going there and John McCain going there. Victoria Nuland giving them cookies. We heard her on the phone talking in the hacked call where she was deciding who was going to be the next president of the Ukraine. And that president was going to be an extreme right-winger from the Fatherland Party, a guy named Yatsenuk. She couldn't even pronounce his name, but she was deciding who was going to be president. And they wanted to stop a more moderate guy named I can't remember his name, and I can't pronounce it. He was a boxer, and he eventually became the mayor of Kiev. They wanted to stop him. The Europeans wanted him, and she said, but she used the word F the Europeans. And who got in? The person the United States wanted to get in, but we never intervened into the affairs of other countries. Right after that, the US built up the military in Ukraine. The military had been very small in Ukraine. They said they had about 6,000 fighters, perhaps. They built it up to hundreds of thousands of people. They armed them. They paid for these people. And they brought them right to the borders of Donbass, where some of the other folks that didn't like the coup that took place in Ukraine, that banned the parties that they had voted for, that kicked out the people they had voted for, were also protesting. And they took over some of the areas and defined themselves as the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republic. And along with the people of Crimea who voted to leave Ukraine and go back to where traditionally they had been as part of Russia, they were opposed to the Kiev government. But the US and the Kiev government were going to stop these independent movements, just like they tried to stop the people in Odessa. And there were other massacres. It wasn't just Odessa. It happened in Mariupol. It happened in Kharkiv. It happened in other places. But they were going to stop them, and they brought the military there. And at first, a lot of the 6,000 military left the military and actually joined with the people from these independent republics. Some of them joined the Russian army, as a matter of fact. So the US had to ensure that that couldn't happen, and they had a strong military that can oppose any independence movement. And so they brought that military there. And right
That's
before
8 minutes, Joe, just the time.
okay, right before the period in 2020 when Ukraine started its special military operation, this force, this gigantic force, started shelling at a very high rate the independent republics and started moving into their areas. It's at that point that Russia decided that these areas they were going to form a military alliance with them, and they were going to protect them if attacked, and that's when they went in there. Prior to this, the United States and the European countries had gone back on their pledge to not build up NATO to the borders of Russia, and they built it right up to the borders. Now there are 16 additional countries that are part of NATO that they pledged would never become part of NATO. They did military maneuvers on these borders. They brought nuclear weapons to some of these countries that could hit Russia in a short period of time. And Russia understood that this was an existential threat to their existence. And that's when the military operation started. And I just want to very quickly say that what's going on right now is US imperialism and its friend, the Zionists and Israel and around the world, are being exposed like never before. People are understanding what they are all about. And the victories that the Russians are seeing now in tremendous ways in Ukraine, along with the way that the Zionists and the US imperialism have been exposed in Palestine, is bringing us to a point where for the first time there can be a serious movement against US imperialism and Zionism that can win. And the Ukraine war is playing a big part of it. The NATO forces that are on the side against Russia in Ukraine are the same forces that are supporting Zionism. But the people in the college campuses today and the people around the world and the millions that are marching in the streets are putting forward a different vision. And that is our vision. It's an anti-imperialist vision, an anti-Zionist vision. And together, if we fight together, we will win. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe Lombardo, speaking from UNAC. Our next person we have speaking is John Parker. John is a leading member of the Socialist Unity Party, coordinator of the Harriet Tubman Center for Social Justice, and is based in California. Good morning, John.
Good morning. Thanks. It's a great honor to be here. And May 2nd, 2022 was an honor before I went to Lugansk. I was in the commemoration in Russia, and it was an honor to be on May 2nd on the commemoration of Odessa. So I'm going to talk, with my timer on there. I want to talk a little bit about parallels. All right, I'm going to tell you the parallels here. Okay, I know. Okay, that's the wrong direction. It's supposed to be that way, but these parallels do go in different directions. For example, we have the commemoration of birth and death. On April 4th, 1949, it was the birth of NATO. And it's also the commemoration of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., and it makes the collaboration of genocide by the US with Israel today echo his words about the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, the US government. I don't think that it's a coincidence that when the birth of the dealers of death and also the protectors of life share the same day. NATO expansion towards the east, towards Russia, doubled after the Soviet Union's military Warsaw Pact ended in 1991, giving free rein for terror against Yugoslavia, Libya, Syria, Iraq, Haiti, with troops surrounding the continents of Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The second parallel, the attempted genocide of Russian people in Ukraine can be seen like a practice run for Gaza. It came with Israel's bombs given by the US. And the propaganda vilification of Russia to facilitate war, saying like it was what they're saying about Hamas, that the death of war knew no parallel in slaughter. But even Newsweek reminds us that the previous genocide by the US in Iraq flew more sorties and delivered more weapons in the first day of the 2003 Iraq war than Russia did in the initial 24 days. The US coup in Ukraine in 2014 supplied the West weapons and horror against eastern Ukraine. Kiev in early February 2022 sent 70 bombs per day in the Donbass region. But then to increase the provocation, it sent its weapons, its bombings went up 20-fold to 1,400 a day by February 22nd, with around 150,000 Kiev troops at the border of the Donbass region ready to come in and commit genocide, and that's undeniable. And the only thing that stopped that genocidal massacre with open Nazi organizations trained and armed by the US was the Russian intervention that was requested by both Lugansk and Donetsk. And in my trip to Ukraine in April and May 2022, I saw the 120 millimeter shells that went through Russian tanks. The US decided that the shells were not strong enough for Palestinian children and still delivers more powerful 155 millimeter shells to Israel to shoot at children as they line up waiting for food supplied by United Nations relief agencies. The third parallel is a direct pipeline of linking from Ukraine to Palestine. The Secretary of Defense 2022 report states right out of the gate that China and Russia are the #1 targets. The document even goes so far as to say that the US should begin training and arming Taiwan in asymmetrical warfare or guerrilla warfare against China. The publication of this proxy war by the Rand Corporation 5 years prior told us it didn't matter what Russia did. The imperialists had a plan of action that was determined to cause war by any means. Last September, the US held a meeting in India, pushing the Indian Middle East corridor, IMEC, with cooperation between Saudi Arabia, India, and the US, with invites to Jordan. And the destruction of Russia's Nord Stream pipeline by the US and the US proxy war in Ukraine helped the IMEC US initiative, an alternative hydrogen pipeline to replace the natural gas that Russia had provided to Europe, from India to Saudi Arabia to Jordan to Haifa in occupied Palestine. Close to the West Bank and Gaza was the plan. According to a statement by the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is one of the Palestinian organizations in Gaza that were part of the action with Hamas on October 7th, the IMEC agreements were targeted. Quote, I'm going to quote from the PFP. The Al-Aqsa flood operation was launched only after all diplomatic means had been exhausted. It was specific confrontation due to the racist policy implemented by the Israeli government headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. It was a move to prevent their Arab regimes from signing peace agreements with Israel and derail American attempts to build economic blocs in the region to besiege China, Iran, and Russia, the most recent of which is the Indian Middle East European corridor, end quote. The pipeline would then go to Greece to supply Europe. And it's really interesting that before October 7th, the United Nations reported record-breaking violent settler attacks against Palestinians in Gaza, and that Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu represented a new map of Israel that eliminated Palestine. Now, the deal, however, was stalled after October 7th. The priority of defense and industrial profits puts a knee on our ability to breathe, eat, and have freedom and self-determination. And on the last parallel, the misery of genocide prosecuted by the US government fuels their profit and their ability to increase the poverty, homelessness of our class, and genocide of people of color here in the US. We must recognize the common enemies of the working class who deny the wealth that we create, a reality that also makes our class the most dangerous to the ruling class. And I do look forward to the day when that danger is turned in the right direction. Thanks.
Thank you, John Parker from the Socialist Unity Party. I think we're setting an important trend here, which is that everyone's ending their talks talking about action, about how we're taking action against imperialism and solidarity with Palestine, because we're not here just to discuss the horrors of US imperialism, of NATO, and of the Odessa massacre, but to say we want to resist what is happening right now, and I appreciate that that's been included in everyone's comments so far. So next, I want to invite up Bruce Gagnon, who is speaking today from the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. And Bruce is located in Maine, here in the United States.
Thank you, and hello, everyone. I'm going to share a short PowerPoint. So let me see if I can do that properly here.
So right now we see kind of your desktop, but not the presentation.
Right, yeah. Let's see. Is it working now?
Yeah, that looks great.
Okay. I went to Odessa on May 2nd, 2014, as Phil said earlier, along with him and Regis Tremblay. And I want to talk about some of those experiences while there. On May 2nd, of 2014, actually I went there in 2016, but on May 2nd, 2014 was the time that, as a couple of people have already described, the Trades Union Hall was attacked by Nazis. People were outside tabling, calling for a referendum, gathering signatures to say that we want a federated Ukraine. We want local autonomy within Ukraine. They were not separatists at that time. As they were tabling, the Nazis attacked them. They burned their tents. People ran inside the building. They were making, the upper left picture, you can see they were making Molotov cocktails, which were then thrown at people. When the smoke began increasing inside, people couldn't breathe. they started coming out the bottom right corner picture. They come out to the windows trying to catch a breath of fresh air. And at that time, some people on the ground were shooting at them. Some of the people jumped below to the ground. And when they hit the ground, many of them were beaten with sticks and killed. The fire trucks were blocked from entering. And I saw photos after it was all over of police standing behind the building, not doing anything while everything was going on in the front of the building. In fact, some of the Nazis busted down side doors and entered and went inside and killed people inside the building as well. No one has ever been prosecuted for these crimes. There has been no real investigation. The only people actually that ever went to jail were some of the people that survived being inside the building on May 2nd, 2014. So on May 2nd, 2016, Phil and Regis and I went there. And we were in a hotel where we were having a luncheon with the Mothers organization. And we just started eating when someone ran in and said, "We have to go now. The Nazis are out there." And so we jumped on a bus. And as we're approaching, Nazis began throwing rocks at the bus. And then as we got off the bus and tried to move towards the trades hall, we saw that it was the area was roped off by the Azov battalion, and they had machine guns in their hands and would not allow the huge crowd to go and deliver the flowers to the front of the building. So we had to assemble in an area farther away from the building. Regis, his son, one of his sons was in the U.S. Army Special Forces during this time. And around 2016, he told me that his son, who was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, was being sent to a base in Western Ukraine that had been established to train Nazis that were being turned into the Ukrainian National Guard. This is a video done by the U.S. ambassador, Pyatt, at the time. It's available on YouTube. It's called On the Road, Ambassador Pyatt Visits Kamaletsky. And they show how the US was training these people. Soon after the Nazis began graduating from the school, US Senator John McCain in this picture on the left, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, and just next to McCain on the left is Democrat Senator Amy Klobuchar. She ran for president in the last round of the elections in the United States. And to her left is another Democrat, Marcy Kaptur, a representative from Ohio. So clearly the United States was involved in the training of these people, encouraging them then to go off and head eastward to the border of the Donbass and begin killing Russian ethnics. So in 2016, I organized a global network study tour to Russia. We went to Moscow. These two pictures are from Moscow. We went to Crimea, and then we went to St. Petersburg. It was in May of 2016 that we did this tour. And when we were in Moscow, we met with Russian Veterans for Peace, who told our group that they wanted peace, but that they were not going to stand for the US interfering in their country, killing Russian ethnics in Ukraine, and more importantly, trying to force regime change in Moscow so the United States could grab Russia's vast resource base. This picture on the right really struck me. It was in a museum in Moscow that we went to on the Second World War. And it shows the attempts by the Russians to be friends with the Americans. This is a Russian troop on the right and an American soldier on the left. Russia really hoped that coming out of World War II that they would have a positive relationship with the United States. But obviously, as we all know, the US created the Cold War immediately after World War II. And it's been that way virtually ever since. This is one of the beautiful subways in Moscow. Each subway has a different, each subway stop has a different character, but beautifully clean and artistic. We went to Crimea in time for the May Day rally in Simferopol in Crimea, and we were invited to march in the parade. We were led by this banner, No to NATO banner. And while we were in Crimea, we also went to Sebastopol, where the Russian Navy base is. And we went to a museum there that was honoring a huge number of Russian forces that during World War II were slaughtered by the Nazis when they invaded Crimea. And it was one of the most moving museums I've ever been to, where they really remembered in a very spiritual way the lives of those lost Russian soldiers. And when we came out, we were so moved by it. We again held our banner, as a lot of Russian media was covering our tour. When we went to St. Petersburg, we were there on May 9th. This was the day of the March of the Immortal Regiment. All over the country and in major cities, people come to the march and they bring pictures of their relatives who died or suffered or fought during World War II, when the Soviet Union lost 30 million residents at the hands of the Nazis. And the picture at the top is our delegation there marching. And I'm carrying a picture, a small picture of my two uncles who were in the Navy during World War II, and both were on ships that were sunk by the Nazis. And the picture on the bottom is the parade the day we were in it. They said that 1.2 million citizens inside of St. Petersburg marched that day. Just in St. Petersburg, 1.2 million people marched that day in this parade. Later in 2016, I was invited by a labor leader in Lugansk to come to the Donbass myself, to Lugansk and Donetsk. And while in Donetsk, as we entered the city, inside of the big city of Donetsk, I saw at the top left this pictures of apartment buildings, civilian apartment buildings that had been shelled by the Nazis during this period after the 2014 coup. So again, this was in September of 2016 that I saw that building. Also in Donetsk, there's a beautiful long park trail that runs through the city. And all along this entire trail were these metal exhibits, these pieces of art that had been created out of missile parts and bomb parts that had been fired upon Donetsk during this period from 2014 to 2016. And so it was quite an amazing experience to see all of this. When I was in Lugansk, one of the most striking memories was this bridge that crossed a river. And the people of Lugansk, remember, this is still 2016, it's still part of Ukraine. And the Ukrainian citizens, mostly coal miners, retired. In order to get their pension, they had to cross this bridge from Lugansk to another community inside of Ukraine. And so what the Nazis did was blow the bridge up in the middle so that people trying to go and get their pensions, remember they're elderly people, they had to go down this makeshift wooden rickety barrier, the one on the right at the top you see there. Some of these people were disabled. Some of them were using crutches. I saw people in wheelchairs, and they were having to navigate this terrible, terrible bridge. It was just another indication to me of the extreme brutality and inhumanity that the US and its Nazis were exhibiting upon the people of the Donbass, the Russian ethnic people. I was taken to a graveyard in Lugansk where this long line of names of people that had been killed since 2014 in those 2 years time were buried. So thank you very much. It was, I'm proud to have been able to share this little story with you that I experienced while in the both the Donbass and in Russia. I can say without a doubt, sadly, that there are still far too many people in the peace movement that don't understand the situation, either in the Donbass today as the war continues or inside of Russia. And once you've been there and you've met the Russian people and you've met the people within the Donbass, you have a whole new understanding and a whole new appreciation for the deep humanity of these people and their determination never to again put up with or be exposed to the war crimes of these Nazis that the United States has armed and trained and directed inside of Ukraine. Again, 30 million Soviet citizens died at the hands of the Nazis during World War II, and they say never again will we ever allow this to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce, for your presentation and bringing us onto the ground and sharing your experiences. For so many of us, of course, that have not gone, it is important to hear these on-the-ground reports and experiences. So next, I want to invite up Penny Hess. There you are. Penny Hess is chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, and she is also one of the Uhuru Three who have come under severe political repression in the United States for speaking out against the US's role in Ukraine's war with Russia. So, Penny, the floor.
Yes, thank you, Alison. And I want to say Uhuru, which means freedom in Swahili. Well, Uhuru to everybody. We have to keep fighting for freedom and liberation for all oppressed peoples. And I want to thank you for having me on this program today and being able to talk about the important case of the attack on Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru Three. I just want to express my appreciation for Phil, for the Odessa Solidarity Committee, the Virginia Defenders, for all the powerful presentations, for Joe, Lombardo, UNAC, John, Bruce, and wow, this has been very, very important. And I'm very, very happy to be able to be here. I also wanted to really salute so many of you who have jumped on to support for hands off Uhuru from the very beginning. I really, it's very much appreciated. And I want to agree with Joe's statement that this is a powerful period of the resistance of the colonized. They're winning, they're leading the struggle against this vicious US government, imperialism, and the understanding of colonialism in the world. I am, as said, I am Penny Hess. I'm one of the Uhuru Three, which the Uhuru Three is the FBI, US government's attack on Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, the attack attempting to silence the African liberation movement of this period. I am the chair of the African People's Solidarity Committee, that is an organization of white people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Comrade Jesse Neville is chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And we are white organizations under the leadership of the party who go into the white population to win other white people just like ourselves to stand for solidarity, genuine solidarity with the right of African people to self-government, to African liberation and reparations. And the Uhuru Solidarity Movement has members in 120 cities in the United States. And, you know, I want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, my leadership, who has courageously fought for the liberation of Africa and African people for his whole life. And he has always fought in unity with all oppressed and freedom-loving peoples around the world. And the attack on Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the Uhuru Three is directly related to the events that you are talking about today. And I would just say that the colonial question is key. We have to understand this question of colonialism, because what the US did to Ukraine, these atrocities that the US has carried out against Russia, but also against the Soviet Union, beginning in 1918, this is carried out because there is a history of 600 years of colonial slaughter and conquest of, and genocide of African, indigenous, and colonized peoples. And again, this is why we have to stand against colonialism, the whole colonial system, that the US does this every single day to African people and the peoples on the planet Earth. And we all know the atrocities that the Nazis carried out and are carrying out in Russia, as you're talking about, and certainly in Germany, in the 20th century. But as the chairman has said, that Nazis did to other white people what white people have done to African and colonized peoples for hundreds of years. And we have to look at the basis of this. And this is, the understanding that capitalism itself was born of war, conquest, plunder, slaughter, rape, and pillage. And that it is built on the enslavement of African people, the genocide of the indigenous people. This is what colonialism is, and what the chairman has called the colonial mode of production. So, just to say that the US has overturned every progressive government in Africa very, very viciously, such as the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, replacing him with a neo-colonial puppet such as Mobutu, who slaughtered 3 million people in Congo, but also the FBI COINTELPRO attacks against the African liberation movement in the 1960s and today, the assassinations, the mass imprisonment with some African people still in prison today from that period, the attacks on Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Fred Hampton. This is the basis. And the current attack, FBI attack on the chairman and the Uhuru Three, is part of that trajectory of the US government's attempt to crush the anti-colonial movement, voice, and organization of African people. And this is a very, very serious attack. But Chairman Omali Yeshitela has always been fearless in raising this struggle. So just want to say very quickly that the African People's Socialist Party works for political and economic power, for self-government. And here in St. Louis, and I invite you all to come visit here because there's an incredible program of the party called the Black Power Blueprint, which in the most impoverished neighborhood of North St. Louis, African neighborhood, it is transforming the situation there, the material reality, with a basketball court, housing for a workforce program, a community garden, a farmer's market, a women's center. And they're opening a restaurant in the middle of this food apartheid neighborhood. So it is really, really incredible. So again, you must come here, but this is part of what the US government attacked on June 29th, 2022. So almost 2 years ago, on July 29th, 2022, 7 homes and offices in 2 cities, St. Louis and St. Petersburg, Florida, were raided by the FBI. They used armored vehicles in each location, assault rifles, electric battering rams to break down the doors, loudspeakers, drones, and a literal army of agents and SWAT police surrounding each area. Chairman Omali Yeshitela and Deputy Chair Onesen Yeshitela were handcuffed, told to sit on the curb outside, which they refused to do. They held us gunpoint in each location for 7 hours, going through files, stealing hard drives, etc., taking our computers, our cell phones. And again, a literal army taking over, overturning the struggle for self-government being led by the African People's Socialist Party. The indictment that we are under, we were indicted last year, almost a year ago. It says that the chairman and the Uhuru Three were under the, quote, malign influence of Russians. And after a lifetime of struggle for the liberation of African people, beginning with his membership in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, in 1966, suddenly, they say, the chairman became a Russian agent in 2014, the same time period that you were talking about, when he was 72 years old. I mean, this is absurd. This is a blatant political attack and a complete lie and fabrication. The Uhuru movement, of course, is innocent. It is outrageous that they would say that African people can't define their own struggle and that they need Russians to tell them what to do. I mean, this is absurd. And that, you know, as of this time, the US government is intent on actually taking us to trial. The trial is scheduled for September 3rd in Tampa in the federal court there. We want to call on all of you to be there and all of your base. We need to put this out. This is a test case that some of the, or let me just say that this is a test case. It involves no violence, no fraud, no theft. This is a case purely for our speech. Chairman O'Malley Ashitella's speech, saying words. This is what is this indictment is about. And the chairman and each of us are facing up to 15 years in prison. And if the chairman is convicted, if the three of us are convicted, there will not be a First Amendment as we know it right now, because they will be able to do anything they want to any organization or any individual based on words that the US government doesn't like. They named overt acts, which I had to look up when I saw the indictment, but that means criminal acts. What do they say our criminal acts are? Our criminal acts include a, quote, a tour that the Uhuru movement followed, that was a tour being coordinated by the United Nations, led by, at that time, Muriel Fanon, the daughter of France Fanon, in 2015, when she opened up public hearings in several cities for African community members to come and testify on whether the United Nations should adopt the position of reparations to African people in the US, something that the UN did, in fact, eventually agreed to do. The overt acts also include some of the conferences in Russia attended by people all over the world, including people from the US and some people from here as well, that these were supposed criminal acts of the Uhuru movement. So again, this is a very serious test case. They're using it to shred the First Amendment, and they always use the African liberation movement to wage the first attacks against the democratic rights of everybody in this country. And I also want to say that as white people, as part of the oppressor nation, as part of the colonizing nation, we cannot let the US government take for granted and get our complicity or even just our apathy in the face of this brutal attack that is attempting to destroy the most important front of the Black liberation movement and the African People's Socialist Party that is out there today. So this is why the Chairman O'Malley Ashitella, is building the anti-colonial free speech movement, which is being carried out through the Hands Off Uhuru Fight Back Coalition. And so, you know, this is fighting for the right of African and all oppressed and colonized peoples to have the ability to advocate for their self-determination and national liberation. I call on everybody to go to handsoffuhuru.org. Again, the trial is September 3rd, the day after Labor Day in Tampa, the Tampa Federal Court. please be there. This is going to be a critical, the most important trial case that is going on right now inside the borders of the United States. An attack on African free speech will end free speech for everyone. I also wanted to let people know that the Uhuru Solidarity Movement is holding an anti-colonial teach-in Thursday, May.
Given my other presenter's face, I'd say everyone knows that froze. Penny, that last part just froze there about the event.
Okay, so just to say that you can register at tinyurl.com/no-complicity. I want to say hands off Uhuru, drop the charges, hands off Africa, drop the charges on the Uhuru 3, victory to Palestine, victory to African people, free Leonard Peltier, and victory to the indigenous people. We are winning, Uhuru.
Thank you very much, Penny Hess, again, for ending that we are in this struggle, that we will win with our unity and our solidarity and our coordinated action. I put in the chat the information about the Uhuru support campaign, and feel free to post anything else. To all the other panelists as well, please post in the chat any links you would like to share, and to say as well to the attendees today, the chat is now open if there's information you would also like to share with others. But we do have some closing remarks. I just want to quickly ask if Boris Litvinov is an attendee. I don't see your name, so likely you're not here, but in case you're joined under another name, if you are here, raise your hand. But if not, we will go on to our closing. I do want to again thank everybody for joining here today, and Phil Wilayto has the hard job of giving us some conclusion and bringing us together. So again, Phil Wilayto of the Odessa Solidarity Campaign and editor of the Virginia Defender, who's based in Virginia, is our final speaker on the panel today. The floor is yours, Phil.
Thanks, Alison. I appreciate that. And maybe after my few comments, we could give the presenters an opportunity to say the website of their organization, in addition to putting that into the chat. But we want this to be more than only educational. We like help use it to help build the movements, the organizations represented, and the movement as a whole. The question I wanted to address in closing remarks was, what approach should the anti-war movement take toward the war in Ukraine? And there have been different approaches. One is from the traditional pacifist organization, which is a plague on both your houses. The only legitimate approach to resolving conflict is nonviolence. And without going into that too deeply, I wonder what position these folks would have taken if they had been around during the colonial or antebellum period at the time of slave rebellions, or at the time when indigenous people were militarily defending their lands, their people, and their way of life from the European colonizers. Would they have asked them to sign petitions, to write to Congress, to fight for the vote, sit down in front of the aggressors? I don't know, but I don't think it's a practical solution. Social democracy, many organizations which have sort of a left cover, but inevitably wind up in one way or another providing a cover for U.S. imperialism. And these are characterized primarily by the organizations that, in their statements about Ukraine, first of all, condemn Russia, and then a little further along, criticize the U.S. and NATO, and may even talk about the provocations that led to the war. But what is heard is that Russia is responsible for the war, which objectively provides a left cover for U.S. aggression. Then there's the left-right alliance. This is an approach that has generated a lot of discussion on the left, which I think comes out of some people becoming discouraged in the present difficult period and giving up on the possibility of building a genuine left movement against the war in Ukraine. A left-right alliance inevitably becomes a right-left alliance, which inevitably marginalizes the left. An example, the Alternative for Germany, or AfD, This is an organization in Germany that has organized rallies against German support for Ukraine, and those rallies have been joined by some left forces on the idea that, well, the objective is to end German support, and so we have to work with whoever is willing to join with us on that demand. The Alternative for Germany has now grown into a powerful opposition party that was recently revealed to be holding secret meetings to plan mass deportations of immigrants. They're far stronger than the left at this point, and it shows the danger of joining with these left organizations. In the United States, we had the example in February of 2023, in which the Libertarian and People's Parties organized a rally in Washington, D.C. To oppose U.S. support for Ukraine. One of the organizations that was very heavily represented was the right-wing and well-funded Schiller Institute, started by the neo-fascist I'm not going to blank out on his name, am I? Anyway, the Schiller Institute, which I think
LaRouche.
Lyndon LaRouche, thank you so much. Recently, happily passed, but founder of the movement, and not only a neo-fascist, but an actual wacko who's been exposed many times in studies, particularly by political research associates. But some leftists joined this rally and thought that it was justifiable. Now you have some progressives supporting the presidential bid of Robert Kennedy Jr., who opposes funding for Ukraine, but at the same time is an extremely strong supporter of Israel. Inevitably, the left gets further marginalized. The other approach is that of the anti-imperialist organizations like UNAC, Fire This Time, Global Network, Socialist Unity Party, Virginia Defenders, International Action Center, Answer Coalition, African People's Socialist Party, Socialist Action, and many more left organizations. That approach is to recognize that U.S. imperialism is the greatest threat to peace and to all the peoples of the world. It must be opposed at all times and in all places. We must oppose all U.S. wars, interventions, blockades, sanctions, covert operations, etc., etc., etc. It's not necessary for us to agree with the leadership of every country under attack to understand that we have an obligation to defend them from U.S. aggression. How do we do this? Protests, marches, rallies, conferences, educational webinars, encampments, sit-ins, boycotts, and ever broader, deeper, and more militant actions, and especially, in my opinion, building toward an actual multi-issue general strike with a practical capacity for collective self-defense. A real fighting united front that can unite all the various struggles in a real working class movement to fight for real freedom, justice, equality, and peace. The goal is to educate the public to the point where our movement is counted in the millions, tens of millions, and hundreds of millions. We need to talk about the massive amounts of money being spent that could instead be used to alleviate human suffering here at home and pay reparations to all the people around the world that have suffered from U.S. wars and aggression. We need to raise the danger of nuclear war, but must go deeper to build real solidarity with those already suffering and dying as a result of U.S. wars. I urge all the folks watching this event to look into the organizations represented today, to educate yourself about the issues and to educate other people and to take part in all forms of protest and opposition to war and injustice in your areas. Thank you very much for joining us on the call, on the webinar. Hope to see you out on the streets, out on the barricades, and as has been previously stated, eventually we will win. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, for those closing remarks. The chat is active. Thank you all as well for sharing your resources. Today's webinar is a panel, actually without a Q&A. So we wanted to open the discussion, make these connections, invite people to support the organizations as Phil has just done, but just so folks know, there won't be a Q&A period. But I definitely, yes, we can go ahead, and if the panelists want to share their websites, I'll just invite each of you to do so. We'll go in the order which people presented. So Joe Lombardo, go ahead.
Hi, well, our website is unacpeace.org, UNACPEACE.org. PEACE.org. If you go there and just scroll down on the homepage, you will see a report of our trip that we took in 2019 to Odessa, which includes a video of that Nazi march that we were on, or their torchlight march through the streets of Odessa. So I encourage people to go there. And when you're there, on top of the page on the right side, there's a little button you can push and make sure that you're on our email list. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. And John Parker?
Yeah, I definitely unite with Phil's comments there. Our Harriet Tubman Center for Social Justice and Socialist Unity Party, you can find us on Facebook, and our news site is strugglelalucha.org. Thanks, everybody, for having us.
Thank you, John. And Bruce?
The Global Network website is space, the number 4, peace.org, space4peace.org. And I hope many of you will join us in Washington, D.C. For the NATO protests. There's going to be a conference and rally on 2 days, July 6 and 7, just before NATO will hold its 75th anniversary celebration in Washington. So it's really important that we turn out people to say no to NATO. And thank you all again. Bye.
Thank you, Bruce. And Penny?
Uhuru, again, it's handsoffuhuru.org. And I would also recommend that people go to theburningspear.com to see all of the YouTube, especially the YouTube channel, the Burning Spear YouTube channel, to see all the videos of Chairman Omali Yeshitela speaking. I'm sorry, I see Chairman Omali Yeshitela is on, so I salute him. And if possible, he could say a few words. I don't know if that could we bring the chairman on for like a couple of minutes to say a few words, Phil?
That's actually a technical question. Anna
We'd have
Edwards
to have
is
perhaps a panelist link. Well, I wanted to let people know that they can come to the webinar that we talked about before. Chairman Omali Yeshitela will be speaking at that. And that is going to be, again, Thursday, May 16th, 6 p.m. Central. They can go to tinyurl.com/no-complicity to sign up for that. Chairman Omali Yeshitela will be speaking then, and that should be a very dynamic teach-in. So thank you all. This has been a powerful program. Really, really salute you, Phil, and UNAC and the Odessa Solidarity Campaign for all the tremendous work and stance that you take. Uhuru. Oh, here is Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
Yeah, we do have Chairman Omali Yeshitela.
All right, awesome, awesome.
If you'd like to say a few words, the floor is yours.
Uhuru, thank you so much. Just a few words, but I really want to express appreciation for what seems to be in this era a new kind of development where there seems to be a growing capacity of what is characterized as the left in this country to unite right up front with the struggle of colonized people, and especially African people who were colonized inside this United States and who were brought into the United States as a part of a process of colonization that took this land from the indigenous people and took African people from Africa. The reality is that in the U.S. capitalism, imperialism, etc., was founded on the twin pillars, the two pillars of African enslavement, stolen Black labor, and stolen indigenous land. So I just want to express appreciation for all of you who appear currently prepared to support the struggle of African people for our own total liberation. And this has been, as you know, the most consistent revolutionary force in this country historically, the African liberation movement, along with the oppressed peoples here and around the world. Thank you so much for an extraordinary event and for the solidarity you've demonstrated up to now with our struggle for against these charges, and in general struggling for African people. Free Leonard Peltier. People have problems, I understand some, with the slogan from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. When we think about Leonard Peltier, we also say from sea to shining sea, the indigenous people must be free. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
Thank you,
Uhuru.
Chairman Omali Yeshitela. I appreciate those closing remarks, and thank you again to all of our panelists here today and the organizations that came together to sponsor this webinar organized by the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. I'd be amiss to say I have put in the chat the contact information for mobilization against war and occupation, MAWO, here in Vancouver, mawovancouver.org, M-A-W-O, Vancouver.org, and Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, which I am representing today as chair of the meeting, which is firethisTime.net website. Phil, it looked like you wanted to jump in there.
I just wanted to mention our website.
Of course.
You can just Google Odessa Solidarity Campaign. Our newspaper is The Virginia Defender, which is virginiadefender.org. And we have a website and a Facebook page for the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. Unfortunately, for some reason, OdessaSolidarityCampaign.org is no longer functioning as of yesterday. So Anna Edwards, who's a defender, who's been handling the technical aspects of the webinar today, and thank you so much for that, Anna, set up the new address, which is OdessaSolidarityCampaign.net. So if you go on our Facebook page, you won't get to the website. You'll have to Odessa Solidarity Campaign NET. I suppose I could claim this was naked government interference and attempt to sabotage our work, but I think we might have forgotten to pay for the domain name. So thank you so much, and that's all I've got.
All right. I know there's lots of outstanding questions and discussions. This work will continue. There's some Q&As in the chat. If the panelists care to take a look, you could contact the person that's asking the questions. We've had an excellent webinar here today, and it's been focused on our continued commitment to struggle in the streets and, the places of poor, working, and oppressed people, to bring them into our campaign against our anti-imperialist campaign, our campaign really in solidarity with Palestine and against war. And here we are, just 5 days from the U.S. House of Representatives and President Joe Biden and the Senate all approving a bill for $61 billion for the U.S. proxy war with Russia, $13 billion in additional military aid, in particular to Israel, and billions for Taiwan. So this era of war and occupation is continuing, and we will continue to resist and unite. So thank you all, folks from the U.S., Canada, Europe have joined us on the call, and we will have the video to you soon. We will win.
Thanks. Thanks, Alison.
We are winning.